Hello, welcome to my video on rebinding Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban into this leather-bound light-up edition. I'm doing this project as a Christmas gift for my sister, so this is the third book in the series. I started this project knowing exactly what I wanted to do and having no idea how I was going to do it, so I started with what I know, which is tearing apart the original book. I'm using these hardcover editions, so I did salvage the book board for these, and I'll use them a little bit later on. And then I went and designed my cover. So I knew what I wanted it to look like. I wanted to do Harry's Patronus, the stag, and then I wanted to make the Patronus glow. The glowing was the part that I did not know how I was going to achieve it. But I kind of made up my design and figured that I would figure it out as I went along, and I did. It worked out in the end. A few trial and errors along the way. So to start, I just cut out my basic design. I cut this out of the chipboard. I knew that this was going to be the top layer of the front cover. So I cut this out on my Silhouette Curio to start with. I do a few passes and then I finish the cut by hand with my craft knife. And then I also did things in a very weird order for this one. I did the leather first. I did this for a couple of reasons. I still didn't know exactly how I was going to make the lights work, so I wanted to start out with the leather, and then I could hold it in my hand and try a few different things with the lights and see what was going to work out. So for the leather for this book, I'm using a sheepskin leather. It's about 1 millimeter thick. It's already purple. I didn't dye this. I usually buy my leather pre-colored because I just don't really want to deal with the hassle of dyeing leather, and I really like this purple color. I bought a few different colors because I want to do all the books in the series a different color of leather. And then to glue this down, I'm just using a mix of PVA glue and paste. I use about a 50-50 mix. It gives me a little bit of work time in the leather to get in all those little nooks and crannies on the trees and on the deer for this one. This took quite a while because I wanted to be pretty specific. I didn't want to lose the shape of the trees or the deer when I was doing this, so I just took my time and was really careful. And then once I had all the leather in place, I just went back around and trimmed around all the edges really precisely with a really sharp knife, making sure that everything was covered and there was no missing spots. And then it was time to kind of plan out how I was going to do the lights. At this point, I had gone through my crafting stash and I had found some side view fiber optic lights that I had. They were really small, about 1.5 millimeters, and I thought that this might work for my lighting situation. It ended up not working, but at this point, that's what I was going off of. So I just cut out the shape of the deer and the outline into like a little groove into the next layer of chipboard so that I could embed that fiber optic into it. And then it turned out it just wasn't bright enough. So I did some research and I discovered these LED filament lights. They're so cool. As soon as I saw them, I knew it was exactly what I needed. So I ordered some of these. They took quite a while to arrive, and I was so excited to try them out when they did. So I just did some kind of rough wiring, holding things in place to test them out. And as soon as they lit up, I knew that they were exactly what I wanted and that they were going to work perfectly. So I just tested out wiring up with my batteries, with my switch, to see if everything was going to cooperate, and it all did. These lights are really cool. They're like silicone, so they're really flexible, and they run off of a 3-volt battery. So I embedded those lights I used 2 strands and I embedded them into the groove that I had already made for the fiber optic. It was about the same size, so it worked out pretty perfectly. And then I did all my wiring, which I didn't film my wiring, but I ended up using a CR2032 battery for this. I already had some battery packs and switches in my stash, some really small ones, and that's what I used. I did have to make the cover a bit thicker to accommodate this battery, but it was just a compromise I had to make in order to make this work. And for the switch, I used a reverse momentary switch. So this just means that it's off when the switch is pressed and it's on when the switch gets released. So that means when the book is closed, the lights are off, and then when the book is opened, the lights turn on. Once I had everything wired in and all the cover pieces glued together, it was time to glue on the rest of the leather for the spine and the back cover. I did 10mm hinge gaps for this one. I also forgot to film the part where I did the fabric for this one. Basically what I did is I glued the book cloth onto a piece of clear acetate, just like a very thin clear plastic, and then I did the embroidery through that. I needed it to be clear so that the light would shine through, so that's why I didn't use chipboard as backing for that one. Worked out pretty well. The fabric is just some fabric that I happen to have lying around. Everything smoothed out really well, and then it was time to do this little spiral cutout. So I'm doing one of these little cutouts on the back of every book. It reveals the Marauder's map, and I'm doing a different shape. For this shape, I chose the spiral because I felt like it kind of goes with the time turner theme. It was really hard to get this leather all in nicely around the spiral, so this took quite a while, kind of back and forth, and it was pretty finicky. In the end, I think it turned out pretty cool, and then I have a quote that I'm going to put around it at the end. And once all the leather was on there, I let it dry for a while, and then it was time to do the edges. So I usually leave about 3/4 of an inch around the edge. I did a little bit more for this one because the cover was so thick, and I wanted to make sure that I had enough to kind of wrap around and make nice corners. So I cut those to size and glued everything in place. And then I just trimmed that leather a little bit so that it's nice and straight when I apply the end papers. Just makes everything look a little tidier. And then it can be really hard to be patient, but you do want to wait for all this glue to dry before you do the next step, which is casing in. So that's applying the text block and the cover all together. I'm using the same mix of glue, 50/50 PVA glue and paste to do this. You'll also notice I didn't do any cutouts for the battery pack or for the switch yet. I thought about it and I decided to do them afterwards, and then I didn't have to worry about everything lining up perfectly while I was casing it in. And then I'm just making sure everything is nice and smooth. As you can see, that switch leaves a little bit of a bump, but I'm gonna go back in and cut that out once the glue has dried a little bit. Same thing on the back cover, which is a little bit easier. There's no battery packs or switches to worry about here. And then once the glue had dried just a little bit, I went back in and cut out around the battery pack. I left a flap and I inserted a little bit of chipboard with a ribbon just so you can easily open and close it. I did put the battery pack too far towards the hinge on this one. I should have done it more in the center of the cover, so that's why I had that bit of fabric in the way. So I'm just cutting that out and getting all the extra threads out of the way. And then I cut out the switch as well. And then once all that was done, it was time to just do a quick test and make sure my switch and everything was working properly. So I put my battery back in. And it's working so well. The switch turns off when the book closes and turns on when you open it. At this point I was pretty sure it was going to work, but I still had to let my glue dry. So I put parchment paper between the end papers just to stop anything from sticking, and I put this all back into my press. And then once that was all dry, it was time to do the titles. So I'm using heat transfer vinyl for the titles. I use the Make Market brand. It's really nice and thin, so that's why I use it. Doing heat transfer vinyl, you always have to cut out everything in reverse, so that's why everything's backwards in this picture. I cut it out on my silhouette portrait, and then it was time to weed. This is a pretty slow process, so this is the quote for the back. I used a really small font for this one, even smaller than the last couple books I did because I wanted it to fit nicely in around the spiral. It did make weeding it a bit of a nightmare, and I had a lot of trouble, especially because my blade was not sharp enough. I ended up having to just buy a new blade, and once I did that, basically all of my problems were solved. What didn't get solved is the punctuation problem. None of the punctuation cut out, so I kind of had to go in and cut that out individually and add all the dots over the I's and the periods and the commas afterwards. It took a lot longer than it needed to, but it was worth it in the end. I think it turned out really cute. So I applied that using my mini press, a little bit of heat. And then I just had to do all the rest of the titles. These weren't nearly as hard as that quote on the back. And then I just line everything up with the books that I already have done. I want everything to look nice and cohesive and lined up when it's on the shelf together. So this looks really fast, but this is how slow it actually is doing all of this weeding, especially really small letters with really small designs. You have to get all the tiny little pieces out of there. It's a very slow process. Okay, let's speed it up again. I can't trust myself to get anything straight, so I always measure, and then I don't have to worry about it being crooked and looking silly. And then my book was done. So I always put everything back in the book press again for a little while after I do the vinyl. Heating it up can kind of loosen a bit of the glue, and I want to make sure everything is still nice and flat and straight and my boards don't warp. So once I took it out of the press, this is what it looked like. And that's the final product. So here's some pictures of the finished product. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you'll come back for the next one.